Okay, I am playing another person, Mameyuko. I am red. Like normal, I retreat my units back to the city. He does the same thing, but a little more delayed. I'm immediately taking everyone off my cities, leaving my whole front slash sensor completely undefended, and he decides to retreat his own forces back from the advancement he had in the front so then he can make a normal front. I follow the same and building my own normal fronts. And we slowly build up on each other's borders. Nothing really happens for a little bit, but we both build our funds, and he does not have his rear cities garrison. He starts sending troops back there. He sends that one troop there down, and it sort of stays like this for a little bit. He recalls a unit back, and if I'm not mistaken, soon he will make the first attack. I sent a new infantry up to help reinforce the north, which I called units from to garrison that city and that city. And I'm trying to replenish what I lost up there. A new city spawns in my northern city. I deploy an offensive with my tank in the north and try taking his infantry. With my other infantry, I deploy flank support, and he switches out his infantry for the tank. I retreat back, so then I don't lose tank health. I then retreat my other infantry back because it was only protecting flank for the tank. Then this is my major mistake. I send my northern tank back to heal, which I didn't need to do, but I still did it anyways. He sends his tank and infantry back to also heal, but I send my unit all the way back to his city for some reason. I then go on the offensive and he tries countering it. It turns into a 2-on-2, eventually a 1-on-1. He sends his tank back in the north to deal with the attack, and I try to retreat so that I'm not as outflanked as I normally would be. And now it's a 1-on-1 with the infantry. I send in new infantry to help finish it off. Then he sends new infantry in to replace his tank, and he goes on the offensive with that infantry. And I assume he's trying to heal his tanks up. I go in to press the infantry out. I send in a new infantry to help reinforce the northern fronts, and he retreats his units, also reorganizing his front with fresh units. And he brings his northern front back a little bit, and he sort of has this hitch formed right about here where it goes forward, and he's starting to build up his own front in the north. And he starts an attack with his 2 infantry against my 2 infantry. He sends in a tank to counter my infantry that was sent in, and now it's just attack. He starts to break one of my infantry, so I again switch it out, and he relieves on the attack, sending in new units to help continue it. And this is where I start to retreat a little bit. I bring the infantry back from the city and send in a new one, and he keeps cycling through, and now he's pressing me in through that. He presses my infantry out. I send in the tank that I sent from the back city. My northern infantry becomes weak, so now I have to cycle that one out. And now I'm being overwhelmed in the north. I have my normal front right there, unprepared for the attack, which I do send back so then there's more flank coverage, but I'm critically underprepared for the northern front that could quickly develop against my favor with his infantry advantage and the tank tide that we have. I send in more infantry to hopefully start dealing with it, but he sends more infantry in out to counter any assault that I do. He then advances his tank and his infantry to try pushing in, but I send my own infantry in to help it. Our units start healing in the north, and he sends new infantry in, as do I. I then switch out my infantry with fresh units, and he advances his front a little bit, and everything goes normally from there. He attacks, and I retreat my infantry a little bit. I go on a 2-on-1 counter up there, and nothing much happens. I then retreat my infantry, so then it's not as weak, but he goes in and retreats. At this point, it's pretty much just a Sitzkrieg. as neither of us are really doing anything. I send in new units every once in a while to make sure that my front's stable. And he's preparing an attack through the north, but not to pressure my city, but instead to sweep over into this northern portion of my undefended flank. And I do try reinforcing the city, which he does soon retreat from, and instead decides to try pressuring that infantry encircling it. I do manage to escape it from the encirclement, but his attack in the north continues. I am trying to counter with everything I have, and I am outnumbered by almost 30,000, 36,000. I retreat my infantry, bring in fresh units, and I take the one-on-two encounters that I can, and I just switch out, try unit cycling as much as I can to make sure that I keep the advantage that I need to keep. And right now he has an advantage in the north, but he is not cycling his infantry out as much as he should, but he is cycling them quite a bit. And I send more infantry in, trying to catch up to his lead of 30,000 troops, and I send in a new infantry to help deal with it. I then go on the offensive against that infantry, and he prepares to cycle it through, and it stays like that. I switch my units out, he switches his units out, I retreat my infantry, and he falls back on himself. I send in new units, and it goes back to how it was before. I then send in my own tank to hopefully try getting an advantage on him, for it'd be 1 to 2 tanks. He then attacks his own infantry. I send a new tank in and replace it with an infantry from the fronts. He then sends his reserve infantry out to reinforce the corner. I send my infantry, which I accidentally produced, into the river to kill itself. Then goes on a full-out assault on the corner, and I'm cycling that infantry out. Then he takes that infantry off, and I quickly crush it through an encirclement. Then right there is the major turning point, is when I capture that infantry. I'm able to quickly crush that infantry right there out, and now he's overwhelmed in a with 2 tanks, 1 infantry. I'm able to start pushing those infantry out. His attack on the corner continues, but I'm able to outcycle him, except for that 1 infantry right there. But his 2 tanks are now starting to lose health, as his infantry starting to weaken. I recall my infantry out, and then his attack actually manages to push quite decently, but I start mustering all the force I can to try stopping him, and his infantry push right here fails, where it hits an immediate tank, and I know this infantry is about to be lost because it's pinned in, and I start attacking this infantry to encircle these 2 infantry, and those 3 infantry are encircled. 1 dies, the other 2 escape, and now his northern front is pretty much under collapse, with 2 tanks and 3 infantry left, 4 infantry left. He sends a partially made tank in, but recalls it, and he tries to advance, but I'm just able to outcycle him like normal. I send my tank back to heal. I should have probably cycled that tank out also, but I didn't. And he advances on my tank's retreat, but nothing much happens here. I'm just trying to break whatever remains of his primary northern flank, which consists of a tank, infantry, and tank. I slowly advance in the major north. Eventually he retreats his center north force, and I advance up on it. And that leaves the majority of his corner between the center and the north completely undefended, but my tank up there gets pinned in, so I have to try saving it with an infantry and my second tank of the north. And what I do is I send it in. He starts attacking in the corner again, and I did not switch out that infantry, and I'm just consistently cycling on my infantry, which he was doing at the beginning, but he isn't doing as much anymore, which is probably the major reason why he lost. My infantry right there gets pinned in, and I try saving it, but it was too late. I continue the assault with that to try breaking that infantry and turn my full force onto that infantry, which is now almost destroyed. And he tries turning it around on me. I'm able to easily encircle, or I guess I don't, but I am able to pin in his infantry and start destroying it. with 3 tanks and 1 infantry against his 1 infantry and 1 tank. I then advance on his retreat in the north with a slow but gradual advance with my infantry. I send in the infantry that are able to fight. I call back my 2 tanks so then they heal. I start to outnumber him in the center here, but I retreat my forces so then I wouldn't be destroyed by his reinforcements. I then advance my tank onto his infantry. I send in my own infantry to help deal with it. Then my tank goes in to advance with the infantry, so it's 2 tanks versus 2 infantry with 1 reserve infantry. I cycle my tank out with an infantry, but he sends in reinforcements via 2 tanks and an infantry. He starts to push off. He starts to hold off my assault in the north, but then I cycle in new units to hopefully try continuing the assault with now a 44,000 soldier advantage. I start an assault against this tank with a 3-1 advantage. I send in 2 infantry to hopefully be able to cover the flank, but he sends a tank in and an infantry. I manage to take on his tank. I send my infantry to swing over to try getting his tank, but I fail to do so, and my 3 tanks are drawn up in an attack in the southern north front. He now starts pushing me forward, and I try to resist and encircle his tank, but I fail to do so, and he immediately exploits that. I start to retreat my tank in the north and relieve it with another tank as his offense in the north starts to succeed, but my retreat was able to reorganize my northern fronts and outnumber his assaults, and eventually it starts to stall out. The attack in the north becomes bigger as he sends more units in to help reinforce, and I retreat again, but he continues up the assault, losing more soldiers in the advance. An attack in the center is started when he advances infantry. I send my tank in to encircle it, and I start to take it on. As the center starts to devolve for him, the north I just constantly retreat and re-push. The center starts to fail with his units getting encircled every which way in there. As he starts a new offensive with 4 infantry and a tank, I hold against it with 1 tank and 4 infantry. And his assault's draining me out. The north takes up the most of my attention as I try to stop the assault going on up there. With a 33,000 soldier advantage, with a 33 soldier advantage in my favor, I'm able to deflect his center assault, and now I'm able to draw more attention to the northern assault, which I have 2 tanks almost destroyed on. I'm able to encircle 1 of his tanks, but in the process, my tank is also pinned in, and I've got no way to relieve it. And I lose my tank, but his tank also is also dealt a significant amount of damage. I leave that tank open, I retreat it back, and that tank is open, ready to be encircled, but he does not exploit the easy assaults that should have been dealt. The north, he retreats with most of his units just destroyed at this point, as he starts an assault on my disorganized fronts. After I deflected his assault, I then send in everything that I've got to take over his north. As he tries pushing in, I'm able to just stop him with an infantry and damaged infantry. He loses 1 more infantry in the north, as another infantry is pinned in the center. He tries encircling my 2 infantry in the south, but he fails to do so as it gets stopped by another infantry. The assault in the south begins to advance as he is able to push his infantry in, but I just reinforce with another infantry as I have the bulk of my units healing up in the reserve line. My new focus is on taking that city in the center south, and I advance with this unit to break through, and eventually does break through, and I send that infantry in to attack the city with the blue infantry coming to reinforce. I send my own infantry just to make sure that I take the city with no worry about what happens to the other 2 infantry with that infantry. Soon I take that city, and I retreat back, and another one of his units is pinned in. At this point, I want to try bringing that tank in and put it on the city, for he has a lot of pressure to easily take my injured infantry off the city that I have it on. The north continues its normal attack in the stalemate that it is, and I eventually bring my tank in, but his infantry pins my other infantry in, so I'm not able to take it off the city, but the tank is still able to defend said city. I start encircling his troops and taking them down. He loses one infantry as another one's badly damaged, and he falls. And another encirclement attempt is achieved, but he's able to retreat. My northern tank would eventually be taken out by his infantry as he's slowly pushing me back in the north, and he now has an 80,000 troop disadvantage. I go in and I start taking on the south. I try encircling this tank up here, and I encircle that infantry in that tank. And that marks the collapse of the southern front. The northern front was able to be reorganized, and I crushed that one infantry down in the encirclements as I reinforce and cycle out my injured units. He eventually takes on my weak infantry and starts to destroy it in the north. I then go in and encircle one tank and one infantry. And right about here, the infantry breaks. My infantry is destroyed. As the south is in my favor, I swing around and I encircle another infantry, which didn't mean much because it was already destroyed. And right there, he broke my infantry but then surrendered. And my major fear was he was going to take my city. But in the end, he surrendered, and that is another win for me.